Here we go. I'm Steve, and I'm here with a walkthrough demonstration of a system of record that I created for regulatory reporting by retail energy provider companies. In this particular case, I'm looking at retail electricity suppliers. And so we started out just, overview here is you can see I have the name of the table here, this database called the Regulatory Report System of Record. I've also have bracketed here the year. My experience is that you probably want to create a new database for each year that you record these reports. Although you could have a separate field dealing with a year, and you could group them by years. It just might be a little unwieldy, but it's entirely up to you. It depends on how many reports you have. One of the things you can do is if you do, let's say this is 2020, and you want to create the one for 2021, you would just go over here by the title. You have a drop-down menu, and you notice that you can have an option here to duplicate the base. And when you duplicate the base, you also have the option of duplicating the records or duplicating the comments. My recommendation here is you would be duplicating it, but not the comments, just the records. So you have a easy way to replicate for the next year and then make whatever changes or additions you might have to have because you have new states, new reports, whatever. But you don't want the comments to follow, which are what was done in the last year. So I have also here the little eyes. Again, they're a little information. They describe what this system of record does. You also have that available here in the blocks, where I have a description of what this, database does. We'll come back to the blocks in a little bit just to discuss that a little bit further. So I created, to organize this, I created 3 tables and created some linkages between the tables. And this is one of the powers of Airtable, because it's not simply a spreadsheet, although you could use one table and do it that way, but it also has a data space function because it allows you to link records from one table to another table. So I had here the regulatory report registry is basically a listing using due date as the unique identifier for each report that needs to be filed. The second table is basically each name of the report, and you want to just list those as the unique identifier that has to be done. Again, I've only listed 3 here. As I said in a prior video, when I was working on 6 states, we had like 125 reports that had to be filed every year. Some of them, quarterly, so they were listed 4 times, as you notice here with the XYZ report. So this table is linked to this table. And then finally, I have the various states also listed as or not only states, but also regulatory authorities for which you are going to have reports submitted. So FERC is actually the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and it will have, like, for example, the EQR report that has to be done on a quarterly basis. So going back to the registry, which is really the operative table that you'll be using most of the time, you'll see that you have the due date, the report name ID. You just simply, when you do click on this, it will give you a selection of reports that are yet to be included here, and that's because it's drawing from this table right here. Same with the state. When you pick a state, it's pulling a link. So you have the addition sign here. You pick it from this table here. So again, it makes it easier not to have all the information as drop-down menus. It gives it a little more functionality because there's other information you may want to include with respect to states that you might use for a lookup function. it gets a little bit more complicated. Then you can pick the regulatory body that's involved. In this case, it might be the Secretary of State. It could be the I don't know what I have here, CIA. I don't know about that, but Labor Department, Revenue Department, and then you would have a field here for a drop down of the frequency. In this case, it would be a question of whether it be monthly, annual, quarterly, semi-annual, biannual. You have here then, going forward with this field, based on the date that you have picked as the due date, you would then have a function here that will calculate how many days left you have to file. And of course, if you pass that date, then you'll have a negative sign. Then you'll have a drop down here for a responsible party, meaning who's the person who is actually going to be doing the filing of this report. Usually it'll be your manager for your regulatory department, or maybe the director of the regulatory department, or even perhaps your general counsel. You also see that here there's a list for collaborators. That's a special field that Airtable creates, and basically you invite people within the organization to become collaborators. So, for example, if let's see, Mr. Griffin here needs to file something with, let's say, FERC, he needs usage data. And so perhaps that usage data comes from Elroy Jetson, who's a collaborator who's in the accounting department. So you basically make sure that you have all your team members who also have access to this table and database here to be held accountable for their production of information that's needed by the point person who's going to do the filing. Here you would have an attachment field for documents that are required to be for the filing, perhaps again data on usage, or sometimes in some states there's a zip code file that you have to have for all your customers. I have an attachment here for the rule for that report. If you have an attachment, if you can download a PDF, a link to the rule, create a URL link to the rule so that you can go and check on it and see if it's changed. You would have any filing instructions or examples, so things that have been filed in the past, or if you have forms or any other instructions that perhaps are provided by the state as to how they want the filing to be done, you can include that here. Finally, any notes based on past experience is very helpful here, where someone can say, this has to be filed with plenty of time in advance, so that if the regulator is going to reject it because it's not completely conforming with what they want, you have an opportunity to still meet the deadline by filing it in advance. Finally, I have fields here to indicate that, a check mark if the report has been filed, the date it was filed, and a copy of the filed document. Now, over here, you have a view here called All Reports, but there are other views that you can create. For example, those that are due within 30 days. In this case, that view that was blank. You can have a calendar, a view of when the reports are due, which is very, very helpful to get a idea of how crowded your expectations are going to be. This is for May 2019, and so there are a couple of reports due at the beginning of the month and one at the end. As I mentioned before, when you get to April, you can find yourself all jammed up here because there's going to be a lot of reports that are filed around the 30th of April. You also have views here for 2 weeks, a week, 3 days, etc. So this is very helpful in terms of maintaining, being on top of your filing requirements. Here are the year, quarter, and week listing of what reports are due, so that you have, again, another way of looking at what reports are going to be due this quarter, this week, and this year. You can also have a Kanban view here, which just talks about the people who are responsible when those files are done, who's responsible for what particular reports that have to be filed. And as I said, that you can organize any kind of view here, or essentially as a standard report, simply by using a grouping methodology, where you can pick a field to group by. You can group it by up to 3 fields. You can filter up to 3 fields in terms of only the data you want to look for, let's say for reports filed in Illinois. And then, of course, you can sort it by various variables like due date, person who is responsible, things like that. So lots of ways to examine the data and stay on top of what has to be done and by whom. I also point out here that you have the blocks. What I did here is, besides the description of what this base does, or this database, we have a summary here, let's say, of how many reports have to be filed in 2019. And I have here, which persons are responsible and for which version of or regulatory agency they have to be filed with. A timeline by assignee. And then I think one of the things that's really helpful here is I've created alarms so that when the due date becomes within 30 days, this alarm would go off. If it gets within 10 days, this alarm will go off, to make sure you stay on top of it. And finally, the biggest functionality that is very important to your management team is the sharing function. So you can create views or access to the database entirely, or even access to just certain blocks to share with your management. You can give them various access and read-write permissions. This can be very helpful, so that if you want to essentially give a real-time report as to where you stand on these reports, let's say you wanted to show the annually, quarterly, and weekly as a quick reference guide, you could share this view to your management team, your C-suite, if they wanted to see something like this and just kind of get a sense of, what's coming up, who's responsible, have anything been delayed. So this is a particular approach that I've taken for regulatory reporting. Obviously, you can customize this very easily to meet your particular needs. You can create new fields that have information that you think is important. You can create new views. You could add new tables, whatever suits your fancy. But this is a good starting point. It will have your basic functionality, and again, the most important thing is it will have accountability, so that you don't stub your toe and fail to file a report on time or without the requisite information. So I hope you find this table helpful. You can see other videos on other tools that I've created on my YouTube channel, Retail Energy Wizard. If you like those videos, please feel free to subscribe and hit the bell. You also can visit the website and the blogs, where you can actually get copies of these templates and download copies of it, or just simply refer to it as a view that's interactive. And I'm looking forward to creating more helpful tools for you so you can be successful and really knock it out of the park in terms of being on top of your business, and not make the typical mistakes that startups often do. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to providing new content for you.